Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Comics All Mode, the podcast where we talk about comics, gaming, nerdy goodness, news, Marvel, DC, Lord of the Rings, Game of Thrones, and everything in between. I'm Russ, and as you can see, this is a very different episode today. I am by myself. Landon has some other stuff, had some stuff going on this week, and it was just kind of one of those things that we couldn't really make it happen. But I am here. We are going, this is another special episode because it is episode 50. I don't turn my phone off of ringer. It's episode 50. If you would have told me, however long ago when we started this, that I would still be doing it and have gotten to episode 50, I would have told you were crazy. But that's just how nerdy I am, that, we just keep talking. Today, because I'm by myself, we're going to do a couple things differently. We're going to talk one comic in particular. As you can also see, this should come out probably like Saturday night or Sunday. Usually these come out on Friday, but one of the reasons I didn't do this on Wednesday or Thursday night was for one specific reason. One of the things we're going to talk about today is Rings of Power, because I have not been able to kind of gush and kind of really dig in and talk about Rings of Power the way that I have wanted to, just because we have so much going on. And so that's what I'm going to do today. And so instead of recording, talking about Rings of Power, and then having a new episode come out the next day or the day that this would have came out, I decided to wait and watch the most recent episode. And man, am I glad I did. It's a banger. It's a banger. So we'll get into it. But first, let's talk some comics, specifically Spider-Man. So right now, goodness gracious. Right now in comics, an event is going on right now that is called Judgment Day. It's essentially Avengers versus X-Men versus Eternals. But they woke up a Celestial, the Celestial that the Avengers have been using as their base. It was a dead Celestial. They resurrected him, and now he's essentially judging everybody. In the main comic, he ended up judging Captain America and killing Captain America. And I guess the X-Men are using their rebirth pods to bring him back to life. But that's not what we're going to talk about, because that story is so convoluted, and I'm interested to see how it continues. Once it's out fully, I'll probably read it. But specifically, Spider-Man came out on Wednesday, and it was a tie-in episode, or a tie-in issue, with that event. And the reason I want to talk about it is because one of the interesting things that it does is that it kind of takes a step outside of what's going on in Spider-Man currently, but it also ties in, and I'm interested to see what happens going down the road. Spider-Man is essentially told, hey, just so you know, this giant Celestial is judging people, and he comes and judges you in a lot of different forms. Sometimes he comes as himself, and you just see him, or he also will sometimes make himself look like other people. And what we realize is that Peter, this Celestial, has decided to come to Peter as Gwen Stacy. And so, whoa, I always forget that this needs to turn back on. Sorry guys. There, that works. So he comes to Peter as Gwen Stacy. And so Peter is really rattled by this, obviously, because it's Gwen Stacy, and we all know what happened with Gwen Stacy. But what's interesting is that you see him going around to the different people in his life. You see him go to Aunt May. You see him go to Miles Morales. You see him go to these people and talking to them and trying to make sure that they're good and like let them know that like he's proud of them, that he loves them, all of this stuff. Essentially because he's afraid of being judged by this guy. But also on a second segment, sorry, my dogs are barking. The dogs are barking. Secondly, to that though, is that he's kind of sketched out by the fact that it's Gwen that's kind of following him around. And so he's not only is he like focused on being judged accordingly, but it is really messing with his head that he's like, hey, like, you know, Gwen, I'd be doing stuff that would make you proud. That's essentially what is happening. And it's really cool because when he goes to Aunt May, like she is very calm about the whole giant celestial judging people. And what we find out for the reason for that is that the celestial has decided to come to her as Uncle Ben. And so she is just kind of really enjoying the fact that Uncle Ben is there. But so we get through this whole story, and what's really fascinating is that the whole time Peter is like, hey, like, you know, he's trying to avoid something. And what we realize is he's trying to avoid Norman. He's trying to avoid going to Oscorp because he's trying to avoid the conversation of like, hey, like, you know, I'm working for Norman now. And at one point he kind of says, he's like, I am like, he's trying to avoid it. And finally he can't avoid Norman any longer. And he's like, I am sorry. He deserves a second chance. I believe he is trying to do better, this, that, and the other. And I thought that was really fascinating. I think it's a really good character study of Peter. And at the end, the Celestial judges him worthy, essentially. And it's crazy because when he does that, what ends up happening is that Gwen Stacy's body is essentially resurrected. Like he puts Gwen Stacy back in her body. And Peter gets to talk to Gwen for like a minute. And Gwen is like, I've been gone a while, haven't I? Like, you're much older. But she's also like, you know, I'm proud of you. Like I know who you are and I know what you're capable of. And I know that, like, you know, you're doing good. The crazy part about this is that we take, all of a sudden, once he's done talking to Gwen, as she starts to fade away, we take a secondary look, a different angle, and we realize that Norman is there. And he's looking at Peter and he's realizing that, holy cow, he was, because Peter says a couple things when he's around Norman, like he's talking to Gwen, but Gwen's obviously not there. So he's like, oh my God, he was talking to Gwen. What we also then find out is that the Celestial has decided to come to Norman as Gwen Stacy. So that's really interesting. I don't know if we're going to ever like get, if they're ever going to play off of that, but I'm very interested to see if they do and see what they decide to do with that. So that's comics. We got a new issue of Thor. Venom and Thor are now ganging up together to fight off this guy, but nothing really major. So that's comics. But let's get into Rings of Power. I said it last week that I've struggled with how people have been receiving Rings of Power, because I am thoroughly enjoying it. I think there are some issues with it, and some issues that are different from what Tolkien set up. Joe, best friend Joe, shout out Joe, actually mentioned something that kind of explains a lot of that, and it's the fact that Amazon only bought the rights to the appendices. Again, the biggest problem with Lord of the Rings is that for the forever, the Tolkien estate will not sell the rights to anything. So they didn't sell the rights to Silmarillion. That's why they mentioned Morgoth, but they couldn't put him on screen, especially during the intro prologue. The interesting part, so that's some setup where it's like, okay, this explains why some of the things are a little wonky, but this is I've just really been enjoying this show, and I'm really happy that I waited till this episode to talk about it, because the last 5, I think we're on episode 6 now, the last 5 episodes have been set up. Like, we have been setting up, and episode 6 is where it's like, oh, it's going down. So the first couple episodes, yes, we're slow. I'm not here to say that, like, oh, this is perfect television, and everybody who thinks it's not is wrong. The first 4 episodes are definitely slow, and also it's, again, as I said last week, it is a very different style of setup compared to House of Dragon. But as someone who loves this world and loves the histories of this world, this show so far has felt like a delve into the history books kind of a thing. I think Galadriel's character, while I still sometimes struggle with the actress's portrayal of Galadriel, I think she's she's actually a really good character. And this obsession with Sauron, who killed her brother, is really cool, because it actually comes to a head in this most recent episode, because they finally, this most recent episode, you have the men of the Southlands essentially being like, all right, we've got to fortify, the orc armies are coming. And so Adar and the orcs are marching to Osgiliath. And it's very reminiscent of Helm's Deep. It's very reminiscent of Helm's Deep. And so you have this fight between the orcs and the humans, and the humans are losing. Obviously, they barricade themselves into the town, and they think they'd won, but actually what they did is they just killed a lot of the people that in the previous episode went and like gave their allegiance to Adar. So then Adar brings his full force, and he gets a hold of Theo and Bronwyn, and is like, yo, give me the sword. Give me the sword. Because what we find out is it's a key. The sword is a key. Now, is the sword a part of Lord of the Rings lore and what Tolkien wrote? Absolutely not. But what I will say is I have no problem with this sword being a part of it, because, again, adaptation versus, just copying. The sword is not like a ring of power. This is not like they give it qualities of the ring, much so, like, once you've used it, you're connected to the sword, that kind of stuff. But they're not treating this as like, oh, hey, this is something we created. It's like the ring, and it's really powerful. It's just a key. So that's really, I think especially with this episode, I'm much happier with how the sword comes to fruition and is portrayed. But so then we get Isildur, and we get the Numenorians, who they come in the nick of time and just murder the orcs. They take some capture. They capture Adar, which that was a really cool scene, because you have Galadriel chasing Adar, who has the sword, and Halbrand follows her. Which, just to say, I gotta say this, the costume design and set design of this show is just amazing. I love Halbrand's armor. It's pretty dope. So they're chasing Adar, They finally stop him, and Galadriel has to stop Halbrand from killing Adar because Halbrand knows who Adar is. He has a history with him. We don't know what that history is, but again, Halbrand has said that, like, you don't know what I've done, and when you do know what I've done, then you're going to abandon me. So Halbrand is like, this guy's horrible. I'm done with him. Like, well, let's just kill him. And Galadriel has to stop him and be like, hey, man, like, you can't. We need him. A, we need him alive, but also B, it's not going to help you if you kill him. So they bring him back, and Galadriel starts interrogating him. Now, here's one of the cool parts. One of the things we find out about Adar is he is one of the original elves. He is one of the original elves that Morgoth essentially imprisoned and mutilated and twisted to his own designs. He is the original orc. But what's cool about that is that he is like, yeah, well, you know, we don't call ourselves orcs, we're urks. So, which then, if you think about it, when you look at Sauron, or not Saruman, Saruman, when he creates his Uruk-hai, it's a cool little word deviation to like note change in that, which I thought was really cool. So he is one of the original elves, or the original elves that was turned into an orc. Now, he looks at the orcs as his children, which is much different from how Sauron looks at orcs, and even how Saruman looks at orcs. They look at orcs as, hey, you are my subjects, whereas Adar is very much like, no, these are my children. These are my children. Now, not sure if he has the power to create orcs or what. You know, we don't know the, you know, reproductive intricacies of orcs. But he's a very interesting character, and he essentially tells Galadriel, he's like, yo, like, this isn't over. And what we find out is that the creepy old dude who was the innkeep, Adar gave him the actual sword. So what we find out is that Theo, Arondin, I think that's his name, gives Theo the sword and says, hey, I know you're so, I know you can, like, you have a connection to this. Give it to the Numenorians and have them throw it in the sea. And he's like, all right, fine. He unravels it, finds out that it's just a hatchet. What we find out is that the creepy old dude, can never remember his name, has it. And he took it to Osgiliath and essentially puts it in the keyhole. What we find out is that essentially this key destroys the dam that Osgiliath is built on. Why is that important? It harkens back to previous episodes where we find out that the orcs are digging. They're digging holes. They're digging something, and or they're abducting people and having them do it. What we find out is all of the tunnels lead to this giant mountain, which we find out is a dormant volcano, and they start chanting this word in Black speech. What we find out is this mountain is Mount Doom. This is Mount Doom, and all the water surges into Mount Doom and essentially like forces it, creates enough agitation with the lava and the magma and all of that, and forces Mount Doom to become undormant and below. And so you have all of this just happening. Really cool. I think it's fun with the Southlands in this show to start realizing where you are in the Southlands. Because the Southlands are Mordor, we know a little bit more information than the people in the show. But what's cool is that because of that, we see Osgiliath, that's going to become, this place. And and it is actually that tower is in, I think, in the Lord of the Rings. My memory is failing me on this one. But yeah, I think it's really cool where this episode ends. This is the lead up episode. This is the episode that goes, okay, nothing's going to change from moving forward. So I think that's really cool. The second part of this, so again, Rings of Power have diverged kind of into two different stories. You have the men, and Galadriel, so Numenor, the men of the Southlands, Galadriel, and then you have Elrond, Durin, the dwarves, and the elves of Lindon. So this latest episode did nothing in the elves and dwarves storyline. It solely focused on the men, the Numenorians, and Adar. So the previous episode, however, did some setup for the dwarves and the elves, and what we get is that Elrond, up until this point, figured that the only reason he was being sent, like he was like coming to the dwarves, was so that way he could create a partnership between them so that they could build this furnace / tower that they're trying to build. What he finds, excuse me, man, I'm exhausted. What he finds out in this episode is that there were intentions behind. One of those being that he actually was sent to the dwarves for Silmaril. Not Silmaril, Mithril. He just didn't know it, and so he goes to Durin. Durin goes to Lindon with Elrond. They're sitting at the table, and the Elven King, cannot remember his name right now. He goes, Durin, like, I want to let you know, like, you guys have been kind of chilling for so long, and now all of a sudden your furnaces are just crazy. I'm hearing that you guys are digging deeper than ever. Like, what do you owe this like newfound can-do attitude to? And Durin understands where he knows that he's fishing for something, and he goes, he's like, I'm just wondering, like, you guys are just making all these kingdoms all over the place. Like, I could ask the same about you. And so they have this standoff, and it's after this meal that Elrond and the king, I want to call him Celebrimbor, but Celebrimbor is the guy who forges the rings. He's the other one who we find out knew what the king was planning and asked him to tell Elrond, but the king would not bring Elrond in. So they have this conversation that hey, the tree is sick. Like, the tree is sick, and essentially what we find out is that he believes that Mithril, if they gather enough Mithril is going to be what helps the elves stay from fading. Because what the elves are realizing right now in the Second Age is that they are fading. And they have no idea why. They don't understand it. Nobody's like, oh, hey, FYI, here's the manual, here's the list, and this is what is supposed to happen to your people. You guys are supposed to fade and move and go back to Valinor. And essentially, the fading is that their souls will still remain, but they will continue to fade until they are essentially just souls. They are completely invisible. But they don't know what this is. They don't know what brings it about. They don't know any of this. And so they're trying to figure out things. Now, shout out to a podcast that I've listened to for a very long time, the Tolkien Professor. He's got one called Realms in something. And Oh, I did it again, guys. I did it again. I'm really bad at this. Um, he's got this show called Around, and so he dives really deep into each of these episodes. One of the things he brought up, which once I heard it, I was like, oh, that makes sense, is that at this point, Sauron changes his look. He doesn't look like Sauron. He essentially looks like a very pretty elf. He's very much an allegory for the devil in a lot of ways, where the devil was the prettiest angel, and then now instead he falls. So Sauron in the Silmarillion, he essentially twists and deceives Celebrimbor into building the rings, and then he essentially makes one ring to essentially overshadow them. And this feels like, especially with everything with the tree and like this weird plan to use Mithril, it sounds like something that Sauron would be kind of like telling Celebrimbor, hey, this can help, and to deceive them. Because what it really feels like, and they've teased it a couple of times, is that with this old mine, and this being where Mithril is, it really feels like this is going to be how they awaken the Balrogs in Khazad-dûm. Because if you know anything, Khazad-dûm is Mordor, or not Mordor, Moria, the mines of Moria. Moria, the name Moria is given to Khazad-dûm once Khazad-dûm falls, and so that could be really interesting. I have a feeling that they're gonna push that very hard, and I think that's where this is leading. Obviously, this is also leading to the building of the rings. Like, this furnace that the elves are building is going to be the furnace that Celebrimbor makes the rings. Now we have that being built, and now we have Mount Doom erupting. So now Sauron has the furnace that he is going to be using to make things. So really, again, this episode really cool. I really enjoyed just what they did in this episode to set everything up. Again, the last 4 episodes of this show have been completely set up. They're setting up what's happening, and this episode is very much, all right, hey, let's get to work. Kind of like, this is the inciting incident that's going to push this show so much further and so much faster. If y'all have not watched this show, I would genuinely give it a chance. I'm having a lot of fun with it. I love this world. I love the cinematography in this show is absolutely amazing. The CGI in this show is absolutely gorgeous. So I'm excited to see what's happening. This show has me very excited. I'm trying to think what happened in She-Hulk this episode. Oh, this episode of She-Hulk 2, like moving into She-Hulk. This episode of She-Hulk didn't do much. Jen is figuring out how to be both Jen and She-Hulk. It was a really good episode. We found out, that we got a little bit more information on the Hulk King. So that's going to be interesting. I think Landon will probably want to talk about that a little bit next episode. But yeah, this is a shorter episode, guys. Again, I'm by myself. I wanted to talk a little bit about Rings of Power. I want to get someone on the show with me that is a Tolkien nerd, and we can really just nerd out about Rings of Power, and we'll have plenty more opportunities to do so. But with that, I wanted to let you guys later. I will talk to you guys later. Thanks for listening, and peace.